Hello, everyone. I'm Andre Dubus, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2023 Brooklyn Book Festival Virtual Fest Day. I'm in conversation with Kayode Somtochukwu Ani, Lydia Sandgren, Kathryn Bromwich, and Ayesha Manazir Siddiqi. If you're in New York City next week, our in-person festival takes place on October 1st in downtown Brooklyn. And before we start, I want to remind you that you can get these books by these authors in the link below. And welcome and congratulations to the four of you for this triumph. We all know that it's incredibly difficult to write a book. It's especially difficult to write a book that may be worthy of publication. And even that doesn't guarantee you publish your book. And in my many years as a writer and friend of writers, I've not come across anyone who didn't have a fierce dream to publish a book. And thousands never get to do it. So let's talk to you, fortunate few. Of course, the fortune came from hard work. And let's begin with maybe Kayode. Let's talk to you first. Sir, how do you feel? Is this what you imagine it would be? What is your experience of publishing your novel?
Hello, Andre, thank you. Yeah, I would say it's been beyond my wildest dreams. I kind of, like you said, had a very fierce ambition to get this book published. It's a book that was very difficult to write. Not just emotionally, but also like physically as well. I literally wrote it word by word on physical paper. So yes, and to see it all come together and actually, be out there on the shelves and in libraries and bookstores and on Amazon, it's more than a dream come true. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having a conversation with everybody and discussing, our experiences and how others can learn from that and also use that to kind of gauge uh, what way forward and how to get their books out there into the world as well.
Thank you, Coyote. And I want to circle back to you. I know that you consider yourself a social activist even before considering yourself a writer. And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the challenges of being a gay person in Nigeria. I want to get back to that. Thank you. Lydia, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Andre?
I'm well. Tell us about you. How are you feeling? I mean, Collected Works is a large book that probably took many years to write.
It took me 10 years to write, 10 years, a decade. So talking about this, actually, it's been a few years since it came out in Sweden. So I have gotten used to the idea of having a physical book, finally. But talking to you made me remember this special gap, between being an aspiring writer and a real writer, I guess. It was a very overwhelming time for me, like this passing from being unknown and just writing, all alone, but by my desk, and then being read, to have somebody read, those stories that I just made up. It was a very, very strange thing. Wonderful in many ways, but also strange.
You're raising a really important point. I want to touch base with everybody on it, because you're right. Before you're published, you're just someone who writes privately. Maybe someone you love reads your work and talks to you about it honestly, hopefully. But there become two of you once you're the author of a book or books. There's the private writer, and that's the writer, and then there's the author, the one who's got books on shelves and in places maybe you'll never visit. And so, a wonderful privilege, but it's kind of disorienting, I'm hearing from you. in terms
Yeah,
of
it's,
your vision?
you have to, it's, I would not say it's like playing a role, because it's not like that, but writing for me has always been such a private thing. I had no one read the book while I was writing it until I sent it to a publisher, and I thought, okay, I'll just do this thing, and they will accept it or not. Hopefully they accepted it. It was so many times, so many years of working. But being lonely, or rather alone writing, is
Yes.
it's a kind of freedom as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
I'd like to, we'll get back to that, the freedom that and how that changes. Lydia, thank you. Ayesha, jump in, if you will. What's going on for you? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? And congratulations.
So my book has come out fairly recently. It's been about 2 months. And the way that I was describing the experience at the book launch was, it was as if someone's kind of turned the volume up on life. And so the highs feel a bit higher and the lows feel a bit lower. You know, it's that intensity of experience, which can be. And at the same time, in fact, the day before my book launch, there was this article that came out, Kathryn might know, in The Guardian, and it was about how, like, I think it's over 50% of debut novelists, their first novel has had a negative impact on their mental health. And I found that very interesting. I think the experience is intense and challenging. And at the same time, I am so grateful. But at the same time, there's also the expectation of gratitude, which again becomes a thing of, like, as if that's the emotion that you are expected to display. And so maybe that prevents some of the more complex emotions from being expressed. And, you know, like, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like sad violin, like a debut novel, you need support. But I think there is something intense about the experience. So it's been, and also my novel is called The Center, and it's about a woman who longs to be a real translator. And I think in this journey, I was exploring my own longings to write a novel, and then also the complexity of that longing and kind of interrogating that longing, and maybe kind of preparing myself. And then there's the whole story around, like, second novels and what that journey looks like, which still, that's what I'm going through now. That's my current battle.
So you're talking about that horrible pressure for the sophomore effort to be as good, if not better, than the first.
Maybe, or it's this feeling of, and I think this won't happen. I mean, you would know, so you must share, but I don't think this will happen with the third. But it's like with the second, there's this sort of doubt of, like, was the first a fluke, and can I do it again? And then I feel like once you've done the second and the third, you probably don't have that same doubt. So
I don't know.
No?
I don't know. Just finished my 9th and I'm full of self-loathing and self-doubt. We'll get back to that. Thank you. Well, this is great already. I'm loving how honest and forthcoming you guys are all being. Kathryn, how about you? How's it going? Congratulations on the publication of your novel. I can't wait to read all 4. They sound wonderful. Jump in.
Yeah, I think publication brought out a mix of emotions. I think equal parts excitement, nervousness, and just relief that it's finally out there after all the, like, years and months of putting it together. Yeah, it wasn't a very smooth route to publication for me. Basically, in the US, I got very lucky with $2 Radio, who published the book and did such a great job. But in the UK, about 6 months after my book got accepted, my UK publisher, Penned in the Margins, basically went out of business. So that was a nice surprise after having done the final round of edits. But in the end, $2 Radio put it out in the UK as well. So it's out there, but I just want to kind of reassure people that it's not smooth sailing. Like, even once you've got a book deal, like, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. Sorry to scare you. But it is really exciting to have it out in the world and kind of see it in the shop windows in Brooklyn and in all sorts of places around the world. And yeah, I mean, it's just something very satisfying about seeing a print product. My day job is as a journalist on the Guardian/Observer newspaper in the UK, and so we get a weekly product of that. But a book is very different. It's much longer time frame. It's a very different focus, and it's all on you. Well, with journalism, it's much more collaborative.
Mm-hmm. I want this panel to be about you guys completely and not me, but I'll share you just a little bit of when I published my first book. It was a collection of short stories that came out in 1989 with E.P. Dutton. My agent, who passed away a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, a beautiful man named Philip Spitzer, he sent it out to 39 publishers. It got 39 "no thank you, you losers" rejections, which is how one feels, right? And then it finally got a publisher, and it was a big New York publisher, which surprised me after all those rejections. But I remember that day, and feel free to talk about this, everybody. The day the cardboard box comes in the mail, you open it, and there's this book that you created with artwork on it from someone you probably never even met, with your name, with your first sentence, and the first thing I did was smelled it. I smelled it. Let's talk about that. Kayode.
Yeah. So for me, right, and I think maybe this also kind of speaks to the activism side as well, because I'm a Nigerian in Nigeria, and I wrote, a very gay book. It was very, isolating experience, right? I was like, am I wasting my time? Am I actually going to publish this book? But I was very, very determined to publish it. I was like, if I have to put out, one chapter, one at a time on Medium, I will. I will. And then for me to now get because I did get quite a lot of rejections. I sent it out to a lot of Nigerian publishers, and I wasn't new to writing. I already had quite a number of shortlists and short stories out there. I was published in like 4 different continents in multiple magazines, but to actually is the kind of a different ball game to get a full length book, find it a home. And I was very scared that I wouldn't, and it looked like I wouldn't, because I sent to quite a number of people. I didn't have an agent, so I had to even as I was sending to agents, I was sending as well to publishers that accepted non-agented submissions. Mm-hmm. And all the agents I sent to were like, no, or they didn't even reply at all. They didn't even give me a reply. And I think it was just one Nigerian publisher that told me, sent me the form rejection of, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And then when I got, that response from Roxane, I was like, is this a joke?
Can I interrupt and ask, just for those viewers who may not know, Roxane Gay now has her own imprint. Is this accurate? Did you typed your handwritten manuscript into your phone?
Yes.
And then you sent a few pages electronically to the Roxane Gay slush pile, of which she gets hundreds, because she's a rare, big time person in the literary world who does unsolicited, unagented manuscripts.
Submission.
And she accepts your book.
It was fantastic. it felt unreal. I thought I was dreaming, and when I think it felt like a dream all up until I actually got the physical copies. When I got that cardboard box and I cut it open and I opened it, and even there's this there's this very it's a very carefully produced book. Even the paper itself has this very brown paper, old feel and smell to it, and it was unreal because it's something that I had put like 2 years of my life into. It's something that I had thrown so much emotional effort into making, because it was a very hard book to write. It was a book that required me to really dig deep into a lot of traumas that I had suffered personally as an openly queer activist in Nigeria. And to finally see that come to life, it was, and I think that this is one thing I always tell people that are asking me, oh, how did you like drown out all the naysayers that are like, maybe you don't want your debut to be, maybe you want to make that gamble with your debut. Maybe you want to write, the traditional.
But Kayode, excuse me for interrupting. I don't know if your audience is aware that gay marriage is illegal in Nigeria.
Not
Right?
only is gay marriage illegal in Nigeria, but being, any sort of homosexual or queer sexual interaction is illegal. If you try to arrange to have sex with someone, like if you try to hook up with someone, just the try alone, that's 10 years in prison, like alone. The marriage part is 14 years, but even trying to like, can we meet up in my place? That's 10 years in prison. So it's it's something, it's one thing to know that, I'm writing a book and I'm sending it out into the world. It's a very scary thing, but knowing that this could cause, this could, you really don't know what the response is going to be. You really don't know where this journey is going to take you, what type of harms it will expose you to, if it would really even ever see the light of day. And it was so hard to, have all this, negativity in my head and still having to write, because I think the first draft was about 60 or so thousand words written pen on paper. And then I had to, because at the time I grew up very, very poor. I didn't have a laptop. I didn't have access to the internet at the time. I was working an unpaid internship, so I couldn't, like, even my phone, I almost never had money to buy data for my phone. And having to, kind of be really delusional to be like, I'm going to just I'm going to just, ignore all that, because I truly believe that there is something in this book that is important that people need to read and people need to, hear about. I think that there is that sort of almost narcissistic self-belief in the type of work you are doing and in the importance of that work.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that everybody, like every writer, should have, because writing is quite like Ayesha was saying, writing is a very isolating experience, and publishing as well. And it's a freeing experience because it allows you to go wherever your mind wants to take you. Like your mind is the only limitation, but at the same time, it's a very, very isolating thing, because not only are you doing it alone, but you really have no idea if it's going to become a success or if everybody's going to be like, no.
Kayode, let's hold it there. I want to jump to the others, but you've said such important things, and I applaud your bravery and your courage and your triumph here. The stakes of your publishing a love story between two men in Nigeria are very high and incredibly impressive, and I want to get back to that. Thank you. Lydia, what about this change from being solitary and alone, as you said, to now being, Lydia Sandgren, the author of collected works?
Well, I think actually it helped me having a normal job. I work as a psychologist. That's my day job. And I did that before the book came out, and I continued to do that as if nothing happened. And I'm very glad I did, because it was like the biggest part of the day. Basically, I was in a world that wasn't like centering around me. I work in a clinical practice, so I see my clients every day, and I talk with them about their lives, and they don't know really anything about me, and they don't care either. And having that job to do every day, which was like an antidote to narcissism and like self-doubt and all these thoughts like, what have I done? What have I written? What will people think? And my book was it was read by a lot of people, so everybody had an opinion about it, and it's really a very bizarre thing being, anybody, and then from one day to another, literally everybody has something to say about you.
Which is I think you would agree, right, Lydia, a good problem to have, right? But at the same time, is it narcissism, or is what happens when we publish a book, our first book especially, we become career conscious. We become conscious of our cultural reflection in the mirror. And we had no cultural reflection before. I mean, you guys, when I first published, there was no internet, no social media. There are all sorts of ways to have a cultural reflection in the mirror now through the internet. But it seems to me that that's something, and I didn't read the Guardian article about mental health challenges for first-time published writers, but it seems to me that's got to be one of the challenges. I think of a wonderful line from a Nadine Gordimer novel called A Son's Story, where one of the characters has an insight as to what sincerity is. It's a middle-aged woman having coffee with her friend, also a woman. And the line is, and there's a revelation, sincerity is never having an idea of oneself. And that line has been in my psyche for decades. Sincerity is never having an idea of oneself. I know that one of my challenges when my book came out, and it was not a splash. There were a couple of drops in the water, and then a wave came, and it was just my life. I was working as a bartender, and I went back to that, which was great. But the feeling was, how can I continue my sincerity? How do I regain all the purity of my solitude now that there's a twin of me out there that came from what I do alone? And I'm seeing you guys are all nodding in agreement. We'll keep talking. Kathryn, do you want to comment on that?
I mean, with journalism, there's definitely a pressure to present yourself online as a brand. You kind of have particular interests or particular things that you write about, and like a way that you present yourself, which is I think not dissimilar from the way authors are expected to behave online, which is very different from how it must have been in the past. Actually, in the Naomi Klein book Doppelganger, she talks about this splintering of identity, and how now we just exist both as human beings in the world, and also we have this kind of doppelganger who we are slightly in control of, but who is like a slight, like quite an uncanny, not quite right depiction of us that exists online and that others know us as. And so it is quite disconcerting to have that splintering.
But I have a question for you, and Ayesha, I want to go to you now, but I about your generation, you are having a much different experience because so many people through social media already have that doppelganger. And sometimes it's a real contrast. We know that's one of the problems or challenges of social media is everyone's become the curator of the museum of me. And that didn't exist when I published my first book in the 80s. But Ayesha, jump in any way you would like.
So I suppose the thing is, it's a very paradoxical thing, because when you're trying to write a novel, you're, first of all, one of the paradoxes is you're writing a novel, you're in your little cave, and it is the isolation itself with which you create the thing, and then suddenly it's out there, and now it's like, oh, you need to be a performer now. Like, and suddenly it's like a completely different part of you that needs to come into play. And the other paradox is something about the intimacy of the text, because you write something so private in a sense, and the more private and the more vulnerable it is, the more it touches the other person potentially. But you're writing this intimate voice and then also prepared to share it, with people. Like, anyone could read this book. And Ani was saying how that can even be a sort of dangerous thing. And I feel like when we navigate the world as people, we are like one person to our family, sometimes one person to our friends, and then suddenly it's like all of you kind of on display. So there is that. And I think with the first novel, there is a part of you, or at least there was a part of me, that maybe doesn't really think that it will be published. And so you're able to write in a way, I think with this, once you've published the first, maybe the censorship is more the kind of self-censorship, because suddenly you are aware. So it's interesting, like the freedom of the first novel in not knowing, but then also how scary that can be when the realization hits,
Can I, you guys are great. I want to address that. It's, having worked with writers for many years in the classroom as well, I see, and then watching the wonderful good fortune and triumph of publishing their first books. I see this psychic transition from the first book was just what you said, Ayesha, which is I am writing for the writing. I'm writing because if I don't write, I'm not me. One of my favorite lines about all that is from the writer Thomas Williams. He was asked late in his life, Mr. Williams, why do you write? He said, oh, that's easy. I write so I don't die before I'm dead.
Yeah.
So many of us are writing for those reasons, right? And of course, Kayode, you've got even more to say on that I want to get to. But so now you've published a book and the world has given you a different relationship to yourself. And what I've noticed over the years is that too many young writers now are setting out to write a book when they weren't exactly setting out to write a book the first time. I mean, they were writing and there was this sort of amorphous wish, well, maybe this will be a book, but it was more, I got to write this story. What's this character doing now? What's he going to do next? What's he feeling now? And then the world is looking. And I come to that line from that wonderful Nadine Gordimer novel. Sincerity can be compromised. Now the world, especially if you've had some success, especially if maybe you've made the publisher some money, they really want to know, how's it going? What are you working on? Can I see it? And how do you feel about that? Anybody jump in. Kayode, let's start with you.
Yeah. So it was just like others have said. It's the first one is because there is a very, maybe it won't be published. I mean, everybody does hope, but there's also that more freedom when you're writing the first one. For me particularly, like a lot of interviews I've done, people always, comment on how political the book is, and you're like, oh, like, how did you manage to balance the politics and make it not so preachy, and it was like I wasn't even thinking about that at all. Like it did not even, I mean, I it's not as if I didn't know that you could write, political fiction in a way that became too preachy or became very overburdening or something like that, that hampered the fiction. It's just that that wasn't a major consideration for me at all. And now that, I've constantly been asked that question, and I've constantly been, oh, what were you thinking on? What were these? And now when I'm writing the one I'm currently writing on, it's always ringing in my head, because, what worked in this, what if you don't do it as well in this one? There's always that, and it kind of pushes us to, or there's this almost pressure to censor and to be safe and to be, because now you have so many other people that are invested in you. You have your publisher that is like, oh, what are you working on next? And you have your agent that is asking you, what's the progress on this? And you have other people in every event you go to asking you, when's the next one coming out? Or what are you working on? And you really now don't want to disappoint, right? And so writing moves from being something you do in your own private time, something you do for yourself, to becoming some sort of a social service, particularly for me, because I'm an activist. I'm a queer liberation activist first and foremost. Even my literature, my fiction is an extension of that work. Like, if you ask me, oh, why are you writing? I'm writing because I want to tell the story of queer Africans to queer Africans. I'm writing because I want to have a conversation with other queer Africans without even, looking at, oh, who else is looking? Do they understand what I'm saying to other queer Africans?
Kayode, can I interrupt? And now, can I interrupt with a question? Because you're saying really important stuff. Earlier, just now, you had said, but I wasn't trying to write a political book. I was doing something else. And, in my reading of your novel, it sounds like just an honest love story between two men in Nigeria. And so can you describe what it was that you thought you were doing when you were creating this story, apart from publishing and all that?
Yeah, so this story was very, very character focused. So I, created August, or basically August formed in my head, and then Segun formed in my head, and then they met, and then they fell in love. And I really wanted to follow the love story to its natural conclusion. I didn't even know what its natural conclusion was as I was writing it. And that's just what I wanted to do. I wanted to write a story about their love without, trying to be like, oh, is this realistic? Is this not realistic? I just wanted to queer people, two people that have been told all their lives that this type of love is unacceptable, deciding that actually I want to love, I want to experience love, and I want to pursue this love. And that was it. I didn't care if straight people thought, oh, it's too there are some sex scenes that are too explicit, or this or that. It's like I literally did not care. Good. I literally did not care about any of that. I just knew that.
Go ahead. Excuse me for interrupting. Let me jump in on that, because I think that's essentially what you're saying. We all have to find a way to protect our solitude and not care about, or certainly prematurely anticipate a readership or an audience. Yes. Ayesha, Lydia, Kathryn, jump in. Anybody on any level there?
I really relate to that idea, and I really like that idea also of writing when you're very clear about who you're writing for and where you're writing from, because once that is clarified, things can become easier, and the maintenance of that is challenging when the landscape opens up, for instance. And how do you kind of maintain that intentionality? How do you not, for instance, kind of accidentally start writing for the white gaze, for instance, and that happens unconsciously, and it's probably even happening when you think it's not happening. So things like that, or whatever gaze it is. So I really relate. And
how are you handling that, Ayesha? How are you?
I mean, I'm not sure. I hope you kind of just hope and pray that it remains, that you don't that sort of integrity to self remains, and that you still have that idea of who you are writing for, and where you're writing from, and then take it from there. But yes, last week, lunch with the agent, and she's like, oh, by the way, although I think that may have been the purpose of the lunch, and by the way, like, what's happening with the second novel? And on the one hand, you think, oh, wow, okay, so this is a privilege to have the support structure and to have people who care and who, are potentially on some level waiting. Like, how lucky, like how difficult it is to find an agent in the first place. But it's really hard to not feel, even when it's very like no pressure, just to ask, like, you can't not feel the pressure, and so, and that can be a motivating impulse, which I'm hoping it will be, but it does complicate things. I think with the first one, it's sort of like you do feel as if you're doing it for yourself and no strings attached almost. Yeah, it's a challenge.
A painful, pressureful privilege. A bunch of alliteration there. Ayesha, thank you. Lydia, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying. And I was thinking when we were talking that writing the first book was something I did really for me, for myself. I didn't think what does anybody else want to read. I wrote what I wanted to read and write about, and like the idea of the reader didn't really exist for me, and now it does. And I think we can never really get back to that solitude that we had before, and it's really quite a loss, like being expelled from paradise in some way.
This panel is going to make everyone who's out there wanting to publish a book, they're not even going to send it out anymore.
But what I have been doing to actually get back to that kind of state of mind where I felt free, and where it was like almost like playing, when you were a child and you could like play out your fantasy world, it was reading. Like, I started to read a lot. Read books that I always wanted to read, and contemporary novels and classics. I've been reading so much the last years, and that's really the best advice I can give, because you forget about yourself when you read. I think you lose some of that self-consciousness, and it's really stimulating. Like, oh my God, how do they do that? How does he manage to do?
It's always inspiring. It's the best. You're right. Thank you, Lydia. Kathryn, you're a professional writer, outside of this first novel. So you're used to an audience, and you're used to getting paid for your work and giving the audience something to read. How do you chime in on this part of the conversation?
Well, they kind of tap into very different parts of my brain and needs. So, I wrote this book in a very particular circumstance where it felt like I just had to write it, and I didn't think about, whether it would work as a piece of commercial fiction. In many ways, it's deeply uncommercial, but it's the book I wanted to write, and the book that I needed to write. Essentially, I got very ill during the pandemic with long COVID, and at the time, no one knew anything about the disease and whether it was permanent or whether it got better. And it was terrifying. It was horrible. I felt like for a year I did absolutely nothing. I didn't have energy. I didn't have, I had this horrible brain fog, and I couldn't think of words. That it was terrifying, and I thought, this is my life forever now. So once I started to feel a little bit better, actually after my second vaccine, that really kickstarted my recovery. And at that moment, I had like a year's worth of frustration and anger and fear, and I just needed to put that down on the page in a very like oblique way. It's not kind of about that, but it kind of took a lot of the feelings and thoughts that I had whirling around my head during that time and try to make sense of them through fiction. So I think it was really a part of the healing process for me, and it was just something that I just needed to do to stay alive, essentially.
Okay, we got to talk about that. Kathryn, I'm so sorry that you got so sick, but I'm so happy you're better now. I think about does anyone know the book The Gift by Louis B. Hyde? It came out many years ago. I read it before my first book came out in the 80s. Louis, Lewishydde, still writing wonderful nonfiction. But the book is essentially an examination of the following. If art is, as we know it to be, a gift to the rest of us, what happens when you put a price on that gift? What happens when commerce gets involved? You know, my third book, which is probably the sixth that I'd written and came out in the late 90s, Oprah Winfrey picked it for her book club. And then I had millions of people reading one of my books. And I met, I've met a lot of writers who've been on her, whose books were chosen by her. And one of them said to me, he's a very famous writer, and he said, Andre, I don't know about you, but whenever I sit down to write, I can't get out of my head that I have a readership I owe a book to. I'm so grateful to the, whatever, millions of people who read my books in the past, especially the one Oprah picked. And I forget what I said to him, but I can share with you all. I'm so glad I dodged that bullet. I don't feel that way. Do I want to give the reader a beautiful experience every time? But do I ever think about the reader until revision? No. What I think about, and I'm hearing this from all of you in different ways, for me, my sacred obligation is not even to me. It's not to my reader. Ultimately, yes, I want to give the reader a feast. It's not even to me. Who cares about it? Blaise Pascal said famously, anything written to please the author is worthless. It's harsh, but I think there's something to it. To me, and I want your opinion on this, and certainly you don't have to agree, I feel I have a sacred obligation to my characters. They visit us and only us. And I think that when they do, we've got to get them out. And that has protected me all these years, you guys, as have been fortunate enough to continue to publish books. That's what's kept my container closed and my cave safe and my solitude one is, look, my only job is to go to my characters every morning, and that's it. And I don't talk to my agent about it. I don't talk to my editor about it. Even my wife, who's my soulmate of all these years, I don't tell her what I'm working on. What are your opinions? What are your thoughts? Anybody jump in.
So I think it is a sort of it is a thing that you kind of end up asking yourself almost on a daily basis when you start writing, when you're really grappling with the thing of like, then you start asking yourself, why am I doing this? And I really like something that I heard Sheila Heti say once, which was, it was something to the effect of, what I enjoy is becoming not the novel itself necessarily, but becoming the person who wrote that novel. Huh. So this idea that a kind of alchemical transformation of the self maybe occurs because you're grappling with these ideas and trying to answer certain questions or just ask certain questions. And something in the writing itself is transformational, and also kind of then the second, so it's the journey, right? It's both the grappling and the euphoria when things are working, which is also, it's like, why do you live, like the same kind of thing, like it's, yeah, something like that. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and maybe that is the reason why we try.
That's beautifully said, Ayesha. Thank you. What do you think, Kathryn? You want to jump in on that? Your thoughts about? I mean, what I heard you say about the writing of your novel was, in one way, it helped save your life.
Yeah, essentially, I just felt that with the long COVID, it kind of took away most experiences that brought me joy. I can exercise, I can go go out. I couldn't. I didn't have energy to do anything, and like even the most ridiculous things could like flare up my symptoms. Like playing Tetris, like would give me like horrible chest pain. Like so, I just couldn't concentrate on things or kind of like any kind of effort that was expended on anything. Like just literally made me be in physical, like excruciating physical pain. So I just needed to find something else that gave me a reason to go on, and that didn't inflame my symptoms and make me feel worse than I did before. And fortunately, writing was something I could do. I wrote it in, like very quickly. It was like a frenzy. I just like the kind of, it started with a character and a feeling, and I just needed to explore that. And then one day the plot kind of entered my consciousness in an afternoon. It just appeared, and then once that kind of clicked, then I knew I had a story and I needed to write it.
I love the way you just described that. I mean, the way you just described that, Lydia, is when I know it's going well, it's an act of receiving. You're receiving something and you're following it. And so once you've published a book, you have to put yourself into a state of, okay, I need to receive it again, but I've got this marketplace waiting. How do I block it out? Am I writing honestly and sincerely? Am I receiving something that's real, or am I just trying to give a product? There's a wonderful Michael Ondaatje. If you haven't read The English Patient, you're in for a treat. Beautiful novel by the Sri Lankan Canadian novelist Michael Ondaatje, and it was a huge international success. And he was asked after, in one of the interviews, breathlessly by the journalist, "Mr. Ondaatje, what are you working on now?" Excuse me. And he said, "Nothing. I'm not a factory." And he said, I did a collage the other day. I wrote a poem, because he's also an accomplished poet. He said, "I don't know. I'm thinking about making a documentary." But I found that, and I was reading that on the cusp of that big success that I had early, and I found that so like a salve to my wounds. I'm not a factory. How do you guys feel about that? I know we're running out of time. Anybody, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we, even as a writer, we continue to understand that we are humans, right? We are not a production, setup. We are not a factory. We are not a printing press. We are human. Sometimes, I really like, what she said about continuing to work as, a therapist, or just continuing her clinical practice nonstop, because it's like you have to still kind of prioritize yourself as a human being and remember that you are not, your sole purpose in life doesn't turn into, being somebody that owes your readership another book that, rises to the standard that they now expect because the first one was, so well received. So I think that sort of kindness to ourselves is also, very, very crucial in how we kind of recalibrate our brain and keep focus while we work on something or not work on something.
I think that's a beautiful note to end it on. I know we're going to end soon. It's a beautiful note about being, I say to my students, be hard in the work, but be kind to yourselves. And I think about this wonderful image from Jean Rees. She said, if culture is a big ocean, then there are major rivers that flow into that ocean, like Shakespeare, like Claude Monet, like Mozart, etc. She said, but there is still that thin stream of my 5 novels, and I'm contributing to the same ocean. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for why we who work hard on what turn into books want to publish them at all. I read yours, here's mine. Let's be part of the conversation. Everybody, it was a joy to meet you, to talk to you. Kayode, Ayesha, Kathryn, Lydia, congratulations. This is a triumph. It's a beautiful problem to have. And no pressure. I look forward to reading your next work. It can be in 15 years. Goethe, do not hurry, do not rest. Peace and love, everybody.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.